dark dystopian technological futures, detectives who are flawed but well-meaning, the femme fatale, ruthless gangsters, and corrupt police departments, and in one case, a talking kangaroo. We're going to talk about all of this today. Please join the conversation. Hey everybody, welcome back to D3 Reads. I'm Eric, and if you're new to the channel, we talk everything books, but we primarily focus on fantasy, horror, and science fiction. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, please subscribe. We'd love to have you as part of the conversation. Today we're talking science fiction, specifically the gritty world of tech noir and cyberpunk fiction. I'll be honest, I've never actually, before preparing for this video, read any cyberpunk or tech noir. It's something I've wanted to do for years, ever since watching Blade Runner back in the 1980s, but I never got around to it. So I decided to start digging in. I wanted to finally get a chance to read these books. My starting point, as is often the case, was Goodreads. What I did was I went to Goodreads and found a list of the most shelved books identified as tech noir. And then I took the top of that list and used that to narrow down what I was going to read. And then, like I've been doing recently, is I put out a few polls. I put one out on our YouTube channel, and I put one out on Blue Sky and Threads, asking what folks, what the favorite cyberpunk tech noir type book was amongst the folks who follow us. I got a list of favorites from that as well, combined them, and used that to kind of figure out what I was going to read. So that's how we did it. Now, what is cyberpunk? What is tech noir? Now, these two subgenres overlap quite a bit, and I kind of want to use them interchangeably, but I'm told that they're not interchangeable. You see, tech noir kind of heralds back to the old detective movies, the noir movies. And they usually feature some standard kind of elements. You have usually a detective of some kind, or somebody who likes to ask a lot of questions. You have corruption, you've got organized crime, and you've got the femme fatale, the sexy female who may or may not be an ally of the detective. Tech noir type books take that, and of course they advance it into a science fiction setting. And those science fiction settings can focus on the technology aspect of things, or they could focus on the corruption side of things. But always it's a gritty story with a troubled kind of loner sort of detective of some sort who has to overcome not only whoever the villain is in the story, but also a system that seems bent on preventing him from doing his job. So the tech noir kind of deals with this detective type character, whereas cyberpunk can be a detective, but often it's not. The story focuses on the same kind of thing, the dystopian world that's created by relying so much on technology, and often involves things like androids or robotics or what have you. But they also deal with the seedy, dark side of technology and how it impacts society. Those two things are largely interchangeable, in my opinion. So we're going to kind of refer to them as one and the same. But I'd like to ask you, for those of you who maybe read these genres a little bit more often than I have, again, I'm kind of new to it, is there a real difference between tech noir and cyberpunk? And if so, give me some suggestions. I'd love to read some more of this type of stuff. So we're going to go ahead and jump into this. The first book we're going to talk about is the classic 1968 Philip K. Dick book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Now, most of you have probably heard of this. Those of you who read cyberpunk and tech noir already know certainly, but this was the book that served as inspiration for Blade Runner, by the movie directed by Ridley Scott, starring Harrison Ford. Now, the movie does an admirable job of capturing some of the key characteristics of the book, but it won't surprise you that there's some pretty significant differences as well. So to summarize the plot, you have a bounty hunter by the name of Rick Deckard. And this bounty hunter lives in a world where there are human-looking androids who maybe perhaps are coming too human, and they are escaping and trying to sneak back into human society and pass themselves off as humans. But they're considered extremely dangerous. And it is the job of bounty hunters to go out and retire them so that they're no longer a threat. And Deckard, again, is one of these bounty hunters. But the world that's set in is really, really depressing. It's quite dystopian, and I think the movie captures this very well. See, the setting is that there was a world war called World War Terminus, which I thought would be a fantastic title for the book, occurred between the United States and the Soviet Union. and it wiped out a lot of people. And the resulting radioactive dust that chokes the atmosphere has been whittling down humanity. And those that could afford to have left the Earth and moved on to some colonies off-world. But those that couldn't afford it or were too degraded by the radiation, their IQ's lower or whatever, are stuck on the planet. And that explains, if you're familiar with the movie, why all those buildings were empty. And in the book, they explain that people could just move into whatever apartment they want to move into, and often they've got the whole building to themselves because so many people have left the planet or are dead. So this is the world that Deckard finds himself in, this really dying kind of planet. They have the flying cars, and but they don't have the cool guns that they have in the movie. But anyway, Deckard finds himself trying to hunt down these 5 androids that have escaped. They were on Mars. They tricked their way off world and are now back trying to sneak back into human society. So he's going to go retire them, and he makes money off of each of them. And there's a couple of subplots that were never translated into the movie, and you can kind of see why. They're kind of complicated. There's a pseudo-religious subplot that weaves its way through the book that kind of takes on more significance towards the end. There's also this device that the humans on the planet use to set their emotions. And you basically plug in a number and say, I want to be depressed today. And it'll make you depressed for as long as you want. Or you want to have intense sexual gratification on your next encounter. This device is used to help people deal with the crushing existence of living in a world like this. So it's got this really dark kind of technology story going on at the same time as Deckard is out looking for these androids. Now go into reading this book by trying to put the movie to the side as best you can. The characters are quite different, and the action pans out differently than the movie, as I think most of you probably won't be surprised. But it's a good book. It's solid. Philip K. Dick can write some really weird stuff, I think. And this particular book, I think it resolves itself well. The characters are likable in certain way, but Deckard is a flawed character, just like it's common with Noir type characters. On a scale of 1 to 5, I'm giving Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep 4 stars for readability and action. It's not quite as intense as some of the good fight scenes that they had in the movie, but the book it stands on its own, and I think you'll enjoy it if you read it. Next, we're going to talk about Altered Carbon, written by Richard Morgan and published in 2002. Now, I understand that they made this into a Netflix series a few years ago, had a couple of seasons. I haven't seen it. Let me know what you think about it if you have seen it and if you've read the books. I'm curious how they line up. I'll eventually get to watching it, I'm sure. But these books are pretty cool. This is the first of a series, so I'll probably try to hunt down the subsequent books called the Takeshi Kovacs books. Takeshi Kovacs is not a detective per se, but he plays kind of a detective role. He's hired by a man in a futuristic Earth in the San Francisco area to solve his murder. You see, in this world, it's got this fascinating setup. See, everyone carries around this box kind of implanted in the spine below the head. And what that does is that records your life. It records your experiences, your memories, and all that kind of thing. And then when you die, whether through accident or you're murdered or you're just going to die, you can take that box and you can load your consciousness up into another body. It's called a sleeve. Your bodies are called sleeves. And so essentially you could theoretically live forever. Now, Kovacs is kind of a military veteran, kind of a paramilitary veteran. He, in years past, served as something called an envoy, and he was trained to do some particularly gruesome type things, but eventually he left this service and he's kind of on his own. And he was arrested and put in this stasis kind of prisoning, meaning that they could take your consciousness, that box out, and they basically put you into a data hold. Your consciousness is frozen in either a virtual prison, or maybe it can be shut off entirely until you've served your time, and then you can be re-sleeved and set out and put back into society until you screw up again and they do it to you again. If you commit a crime that's heinous enough, you can be permanently killed, which is supposed to be very rare, but it can happen if your crimes are egregious enough. So Kovacs, though, is on ice. He's in stasis, but he's brought back and re-sleeved into a body on Earth. He actually lives off-world in this place called Harlan's World. His consciousness is put into this body, and he is being given an offer by this rich man who was murdered, but his body was re-sleeved. His consciousness was re-sleeved because the rich can actually grow clones of the bodies that they like, and then if they pass away, they can be re-sleeved into the bodies that they've already prepared for themselves. And that's what's happened. He was murdered, but he's got this 2-week blank spot from the last time his consciousness was backed up, because he gets this wireless service. And he doesn't know who killed him. The police say he committed suicide. He said, "There's no way I committed suicide." And he wants Kovacs to figure out who murdered him. And that sets the chain of events off. Kovacs is playing the role of the detective. He runs into the person who hired him, his wife named Miriam. She's kind of the femme fatale in the story, though that there's a couple of folks that you could say are the femme fatale. And he's got to figure out who murdered this guy, but right away he is being attacked by all sorts of different elements. He's being helped by someone in the police station, but there's corruption in the police station that they've got to deal with. There's corruption everywhere. And so he has got to find his way through who killed this guy, because he becomes convinced pretty quick that suicide isn't likely, but it gets really, really complicated as the story advances. The story is action-packed, very enjoyable. The book, though, has some pretty intense violence, and also has some pretty graphic sex scenes. Now, I'm not a prude, but and I get a little turned off when the sex just seems to be gratuitous. You may not be like that. You may be fine with that, but I do want to throw that out there before recommending it, that if you don't like gratuitous sex scenes or intense violence, you may want to skip this one, or maybe skip over that part of the book. But because I don't particularly think that it advances it too much. But the book is, I think, really, it grabs you, and it really has some very well-developed characters. And Kovacs is a really interesting kind of character that I plan on following up and reading up some further books. If you look at the Goodreads list of top tech noir books, you'll see that the Kovacs books, I think, take the top 4 positions on it. So it's very well regarded, I guess, for those who read tech noir and cyberpunk. I'm going to give this one 5 stars. I think it was the most intense, serious read of all the books that we're covering today. This next book, I have a hard time describing this one. It's called Gun with Occasional Music, and it was written by Jonathan Lethem and published in 1994. This book has all the elements of tech noir. It's got a private detective called a private inquisitor in the book. It's got the femme fatale. It's got the corrupt gangster type character. It's got the corrupt police department. It's got rampant drug use. Oh my goodness. Matter of fact, it's embedded in society. The main character snorts this stuff called make. That's the generic expression for it, for specific reasons. And let's get to that here in a second. But the thing about this story that's so bizarre is you get the feeling like it's a kind of gritty, hardcore kind of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. The story is set in a futuristic San Francisco, much like Altered Carbon, except here you have your regular folks, and you also have these advanced, evolved animals. They were technology created these things so that you could raise an animal with the intelligence of human. So you have these characters walking around who are rabbits, who are there's one of the main antagonists is an intelligent kangaroo. So it's kind of hard as you're reading this, and you're reading something that is really engaging and kind of gritty, just like any kind of good noir type story. And then you've got a kangaroo come out with a handgun. So it's kind of bizarre. So I didn't know if I should be laughing or what, but the story is so solid. The main character is a private inquisitor by the name of Conrad Metcalf. And you see, in this society, a couple of things have happened. One is there was some kind of event that's not particularly well described, because it's kind of in history, that's described as an inquisition. And society now seems to be quite controlled at a level that the news is highly censored and given out in small doses just to make sure that it doesn't cause any unrest. there's this stuff called make, which is a drug that is highly encouraged for everyone to use. It's not mandatory, but it's kind of like cigarettes or caffeine at this point, and the main character takes it. It's called make, and you could have your own blend of it. And the ingredients are things like forgetol and acceptol, and then the common component amongst all of them is addictol, so that everybody who's using this stuff will become addicted to it and use it to calm your nerves or give you energy or whatever. And so it's really kind of jarring as you're reading this that the main character is like, oh, I got to go and snort some of my make because I'm feeling really kind of. So drugs play a big role in this, and you can tell that the story is making a statement. But in addition to that, the society considers asking questions rude, and so it's kind of making the case that something happened in the past with this Inquisition, so that really you don't ask questions of strangers unless you're an inquisitor, right? And so people aren't used to it, and so if you ask a question, it's considered kind of rude. It's just this nuance that adds this level of realism and enjoyment to the story. But again, every time a character, a talking sheep comes up, it kind of throws you off. This story, I think, is way more fun than I expected. I wasn't sure what to make of it as I went through it, but the mystery is fun to stick with, to see how he puts things together. The characters are odd. In the beginning of the story, Metcalf is confronted by a guy who's being framed for the murder of a rich doctor. And oh, that's the other thing about it. Everybody has these debit cards that carry karma on. And so everybody has karma assigned to them. And if your karma ever goes below 0, then you get put on ice, meaning you get put into a virtual prison, basically turned off until your sentence is over, and then you get turned back on again, and you go back into society until you mess up again. So kind of like, so it's kind of a grim kind of future, and it's just such an interesting world setting that the story is really, really fun to read. I give it 4 stars. Conrad Metcalf cracked me up. His the first person storytelling in this is just like you would expect a detective to be talking. So I do recommend this. Just give it a chance. Don't let the talking animals throw you off, because the story is really, really well told. The final book that we're going to talk about is one I haven't quite finished yet. I'm almost done, but I didn't quite get it done before I needed to make this video. But it's called When Gravity Fails. It was published in 1987 by George Alec Effinger. This story is so different from all the others while still keeping the primary characteristics of a tech noir or cyberpunk story. The main character is a man by the name of Marie Audrin, and the world that he's set in is not what we're accustomed to when you're reading these types of things. Instead of a kind of advanced or dystopian Western world, this story takes place in an advanced dystopian kind of Arabic world set in a very New Orleans kind of city. So there's this section of this city which is ruled over by a Muslim-style type of government. There's a French Quarter kind of area where most of the action takes place in. And Marid is the main character. He's not a detective, but he works sometimes along with the police. He lives and flourishes in this seedy French Quarter kind of area that a series of crimes start to take place that he gets drawn into. The cultural shift from a Western type environment to an Arabic Muslim kind of environment it's really fresh. It's fun to read. If you've ever served in the Middle East, I spent a few years in the Middle East, and you pick up some of the characteristics, and you get exposed to some of the social dynamic there that gets reflected, I think, very, very well, at least from my perspective, in the story. Now, the people in this world, I think I've read that it's in the 22nd century, they have these plugins into their brain. They call them daddies and mods. And what you can do is you can take a mod and you plug it into your brain, and you can assume the identity of anybody you want to on that mod. So you can buy a mod that lets you be Sherlock Holmes, for instance, or in the case of the book, someone buys one to be James Bond, plugs it in, and you start talking and acting like James Bond, and you even get some of the skills they have. You could put one in to speak Arabic or another language or what have you, be a history buff, that kind of thing. So the character Mareed, he is someone who's been not really excited about the idea of getting his brain configured to hold one of these, so he holds off for most of the book. So he's kind of forced into the situation as he's trying to hunt down a killer who has been murdering people that he knows throughout the story. So again, I'm only about 80% of the way into this book, but it's got all the trappings of a good noir film and cyberpunk. Like I say, he's a detective-like character. He's got to deal with the police who really are on cordial terms at best with him. There's kind of a gang kind of power structure in the city as well that he has to contend with. It's got all the good trappings of a noir type film, but the take on it and the environment that's set in, it's just really kind of cool. So I haven't finished it right now. I'm leaning towards 4 stars for this one as well. It's well worth your time if you're into that kind of story. But let me know what you think about this book or any of the books that we talked about. But if you're into cyberpunk or tech noir, let me know what we left off that we should have included in a list like this. I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of these books or any of your own personal favorites. Until next time, everybody, keep reading.